What I've been trying to do is trying to pull together information from either open source on the web or also from material that's been released by Edward Snowden. And so, and the point was that a lot of this material comes out into the news media in various bits and pieces, and people don't clearly understand what that really means or how it fits together. So what I was trying to do was to pull information from the web that I could see, and also slides from released by Edward Snowden into a presentation that would help people understand what's really happening to them. So this is what I want to go through here. So it's pretty straightforward. It's how they're collecting information on everybody on the planet. It is anybody that uses anything electronically or financial transactions, phone calls, email, everything. And this is how they're doing it. And this slide simply shows the kind of information they want to pull together on anybody, just to track everybody, where they are, what they're doing, and really getting into what they're thinking. Because if you assemble this kind of information on individuals in terms of what they're buying, what they're Googling, or what they're saying, or where they're moving, all of that kind of information, you can pull that back together and really start to see into their thinking process. And when you do this on a massive scale, you're looking at the entire planet and what the planet's thinking. This is how you begin to assemble information to be able to control people. Okay, so this is basically what they're doing. So this is the kind of information, and they acquire it fundamentally. The bulk of it is done through the fiber optic networks around the world, because that's where the vast bulk of information is being transferred back and forth between people. And so I went on the web to try to look at points of interest in the fiber optic networks. All of this is documented on the web. If you want to go find it, just Google any of these companies and their fiber lines, and then they'll show you the layout of fibers that they manage around the world. So in collecting information, you want to try to optimize the data that you're collecting. So you have to look at where these fiber lines converge, because at that point, if you put a collection device, you can see many fibers simultaneously, and you optimize your output for your collection device at that point. So the idea is to find where those lines converge, and that's where you want to put your collection device. So when I went through these are the only four that I looked at, but between AT&T, Verizon, British Telecom, and T-Mobile, these are the cities where they have at least 3 or more fiber lines converging. So that's an optimal point to put collection devices. Because at that point, that picks up all the communications in all those lines. After all, if you send an email and you put multiple addresses on your email, it will go through the fiber lines in many directions. And they'll pass through some of these switches, so that chances are that they will get virtually anything that anybody sends anywhere if they focus at these points. So this is basically inside the United States, because 80% of the fiber lines are inside the United States or pass through the United States. That means that automatically, if you put all your collection devices in the United States per se, you get to see on percentage-wise on the order of 80% of everything the world transmits. Because all those lines, and it's no coincidence, by the way, that fiber lines run from South America up to Miami in Florida, and then back down to South America. That's so that all the flow coming up and down, even when they're sending light from Brazil to Argentina, it goes up through Miami and comes back down. So they had an 80% probability of getting there. So, and there's more. These were other positions inside the United States. And of course, then it goes around the world. Most of the collection points would be in the US. But here are the ones in the rest of the world. That is where 3 or more lines would converge just with these 4 companies. They're not limited to these 4 companies, however. These are just the 4 that are major ones for us in the United States or in Britain and so on. So once you do that, then the idea is to tap into the lines. And how do they do that? Well, there are 3 basic approaches they use. One, the first and obvious one to try to do is get the corporate cooperation. That is, get the companies that manage the fiber optic lines to cooperate with you. Of course, you pay them for it. You give them money, so it adds to their business bottom line. And that's how you buy your way into it. And then, because once you put the fiber taps on and start collecting material, the companies will manage it for you, so it's not an overhead management problem for you. That they have technicians to manage it. That's much like what Mark Klein, when he talked about the AT&T facility and the fiber optic taps for the NSA, in the NSA room on the 6th floor, I think it was, of the AT&T building. Well, that's the best way to do it, because then AT&T manages all that, so NSA doesn't have to. Once they have the initial payment to buy the room, set it up, and then just have a monthly or yearly payment going to AT&T just to get the data. Why, AT&T then manages it, because it's all the equipment they're familiar with, so that makes it easy to do. And then the second way is if they don't have corporate cooperation, they can go to the local foreign government. And or the counterpart that they have, like NSA, could go to GCHQ or B&D or FRA or NIS or DIS or any similar kind of organization, SIGINT organization in a foreign land, and have an agreement there, and then get the government to come around and agree to it. This is how the intelligence community works together, okay? So worldwide, it's not just in the Five Eyes, but. So that then is arranged either by a second party or a third party. That's defined. First party is U.S., second party is the other English-speaking countries, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and third party is everybody else. That's how they classify countries and relationships. So, but if you go there and get their agreement, then they similarly get the local company to agree, and that's how they leverage them, and they then tap the line. And the ultimate way is if you can't get the corporate companies or you can't get the governments to agree, we'll do it unilaterally. That simply means this is how they tapped into Google's lines between their major centers when they were transferring data back and forth. It was a unilateral tap. So that means anywhere they can have access to the fiber, they can go tap it without anybody knowing. Not the government or the corporation. So this is like, if you want to find out some of the ways, you can Google USS Jimmy Carter. That's a submarine. So that's how you can get into under ocean taps or things of that nature. So the idea is you have to have a physical access, that's all. So anywhere the fiber, like if you want to find out your fibers are tapped and you want to know if they did it unilaterally, you would have to trace the fiber lines all the way. Through the ocean, under the oceans, everywhere. Okay? Just to be sure you're not tapped. But these are the three ways that they do the tapping. So, and these are the parties that I was talking about. First party is, of course, U.S., second party is the other English-speaking, and third party is everybody else. These are the relationships they have, at least as they've been, this is from the Snowden's material, so it at least lays out the countries that are cooperating. The slides will be here if you want to get copies. I'm sure they'd be glad to give you copies. So then, this was one of the PRISM slide. PRISM made created a lot of interest over in my country because they were talking about going to the internet service providers and various other service providers and getting information directly from them on U.S. citizens and everybody else that those companies service. But the real tap was on the real information acquisition system is the upstream system. That's where all the fiber optic taps are. And it says right there, collection of communications on fiber cables and infrastructure as data flows past. That means the fiber optic taps, okay? So that's how they're tapping into the system, the three ways I've talked before. And you see some of the names there, programs, Fairview, Stormbrew, Blarney, and Oakstar. Well, those are only four. Okay, it doesn't mean they're all, but Fairview is the one of interest here, and that's where they get the bulk of content as well as metadata. Now, they get that from PRISM too, but it's more of a requesting specific information on specific people from companies, whereas the upstream is collecting everybody. It's taking in the bulk acquisition. And in the case of Fairview, these are the fiber optic taps in the United States. This is domestic collection in the United States. There's about 80 to 100 of these taps. These are all the points, and if you went back to the names of the cities we gave, you can see the cities there. That's for the internet. The internet taps, I believe, are the dark blue colored figures here that show you where they're tapping for the internet, and the others are the phone network, like the public switch telephone network where they digitally record the phone calls. That's how Tim Clementi, a former FBI agent, could say on CNN television that after the bombing in Boston, that they had ways and means of getting back to the communications, the phone call between one of the Tsarnaev brothers and his wife. He said they had a way of getting back to that. Well, it's because they're tapping and recording the phones, so that it's indexed and available to them. Probably for a period of time, my estimate was somewhere between 20 and 30 days. Because there's probably on the order of 3 billion phone calls made every day in the United States, and something like, similarly, something like 12 billion around the world, so it's a lot to record, and so they have a window of recordings, I'm sure, to be able to get back to within a certain period of time. And as they add days, then they age off the older days, so that window keeps floating forward. So. But these are the taps that they're using. This is another slide from Snowden. You can tell by the classifications at the bottom. So, this is worldwide, what they do. It shows the satellite collection, and one of the main entries there is, if you see there on the ledger down there in the lower right, is CNE, that's computer network exploitation. That says over 50,000 implants in the worldwide network. What that means is, and Jacob Applebaum did a presentation at the 30C3 conference in Hamburg, where he showed a slide where they were intercepting a shipment of Cisco routers, and the NSA personnel were implanting hardware and software on those. They intercepted it in transit, okay? So that the Cisco didn't know they were doing it, nor did the receiver know it was intercepted in the mail. So then they opened it up and put in hardware and software on that switch, so that when it got to its destination, the unknowing recipient would put them in their system, and in fact be infecting their system with these implants. And the implants could then mirror image these switches or servers that they had, which means they could take anything going through that switch or anything, either subsets of that information or all of it. And they can also use it in terms of servers. When they implant them in the servers, they can drain the server, meaning take all the information that the server has over a period of time using the unused CPU on the system and draining it out even when they're on the air, or even when they're transmitting or using that server. So, but the rest of it is a bunch of other things like the third-party liaison and regional SCS, and those are basically our foreign positions in the world, plus, of course, the satellite network. So these are all the different systems that acquire information. And you'll notice, of course, that the U.S. is dark, is blank, there's nothing inside. So you know that this slide is not telling you everything, okay? Because just from the Fairview slide that we showed before, you saw 80 to 100 taps inside the United States. Well, similarly, you don't see anything in Australia or New Zealand, and also Canada and England. Well, that's the Five Eyes game. They're the center of this collection of information. So, but that fundamentally means that the NSA owns the network, all of it. So if you looked at it, then you're looking basically at two systems for communication. One's the public switch telephone network, and the other is the internet. Well, the public switch telephone network is the entire world is divided up by the ITU into a number scheme, so that when you dial your number, right, this is a part of the scheme that goes into it. So if you dial 00 here to get an international switch, then the next number you dial will get you to a region of this world. 1, if you hit 1, you're going to the US or Canada, or 2 is Africa, 3 and 4 is North and South, or South and North Europe, and so on. So all the way around, this is the way the switches manage when you make the phone call, all of the switches are managing it. So you're giving them information. The number tells the switches how to route your communications through the system. So that means that, and this is how caller ID works, okay? Because caller ID sees the number it's coming from, and it tells you what number is calling you. So all this is the information that the switches need to route calls to and from. So what that means is, for example, when the director of NSA got up and said that during just before the 9/11 attack in the U.S., that the NSA couldn't tell that the phone calls were coming from San Diego going back to the Yemen facility for Al-Qaeda. Well, it was absolutely false, okay, because the switches knew, and NSA would know because they had the data too that they're seeing off their networks and the taps. So they have all the data too from. That was just an outright lie. And that was only an excuse because then they could claim that they didn't know, you know. So there was no way they didn't know. So then the point is that if you're looking, in that case, for anything that's inside the United States, which they should have been, if something was calling a known Yemen facility for Al-Qaeda that was well known, that facility had been watched for several years even before that. So if somebody with a 1 on the number was calling into that Yemen facility, you knew it was immediately in the U.S. So, I mean, you know, it wasn't difficult. So the switches know how this works. So should our people who are working there, right? Actually, they do. They just don't want to admit it. So, but at any rate, that's very simply how you can approach the public switch telephone network. And the Internet is a very similar thing, although it's not as rigidly structured number-wise. They give out numbers in terms of IPs, Internet Protocol versions 4 and 6, which are different numbering schemes. You see the number runs from 0 to 255, and then 4 numbers that running from 0 to 255. That's IPv4 numbering scheme. There's block allocated by the IANA, the ICANN, you know, and so. These are all block numbers, just like the numbering scheme for the public switch telephone network, except the blocks are subdivided by the 5 areas here at the world. Like they'll take a block and divide it into 5 parts and spread it around the world. It's like, so it wouldn't mean that something starting with a 1, 2 would be in a certain area. Only part of that block would be, you know, and the other part would be in different areas. So then another block, they do the same divisions, and the same would be true with IPv6. But still, the numbering scheme, if you know the blocking, is the same, a very similar thing. Also, I might add that every device on the network, including your cell phones, your computers, servers, switches, all have a MAC number, a machine access code, which allows it tells the system where in the world you are, even if you're moving. When you're roaming, your number gets registered with the local area, so then it identifies you in that network worldwide. So that gives the system how to route it to you. So that's how that works. So then what they do is they do what is currently called graphing. That means they take a phone call or an email and use the metadata to link people, and people are communicating, or people are transferring money, or people are traveling, or where you live, or all kinds of relationships. And this linking process is how they build knowledge about the people in the world. And so, I don't have a pointer here, but if you go from one of these blocks, like if this was a known terrorist, this would be a relationship, a phone call to another person that isn't a known terrorist and someone who is. So this is how you would say A calls B, A calls C, A calls D, and so on. And you link that all through the world and all that metadata relationships, and you put it into a rapid response kind of interrogating program, which is fundamentally a B+ tree index if you are familiar with coding. That makes it easy to get to real quick, and also get answers back real quick so you can keep up with fiber optic rates and then keep your processing moving. So that's fundamentally how that works. And then this is like 7 billion people would just continue, you know, that's how the connections would be of everybody in the world. And then you do this for every other means of communications and means of transactions for phone or financial transactions, stock transactions, everything you can think of that could be linked in that way. Each would be a separate graph, but then you start mapping the graphs and you get the entire every aspect of your life can be mapped in that way, and then it's consolidated to put it back together. But in the process, if they wanted to do a focused analytic approach, that would be real easy. Instead of taking in everything and graphing everything, all they would have to do is if you have a known bad guy, is put him and only the first contact from that bad guy that isn't known. All the data for those two will give you anything that you wanted for terrorism or for dope smuggling. everybody else in the world, you don't want to take in their data because all that does is bury you, and that's effectively what they're doing. They're taking in massive amounts of data and burying themselves so they can't figure out what's happening or what's going to happen because they can't get through it. There's just too much data. And they don't have the programs to do it, although they're soliciting that with the White House Big Data Initiative that they issued in early 2012, I think it was, asking the industry to come up with algorithms that could go through big data sets to find out what's important for them to look at in there with their people, using their people, because people can't get through it. So they need programs to go through it and find out. That's why they didn't stop the Boston bomber, the Fort Hood shooter, or the underwear bomber, or the Times Square bomber, because they had too much data. This is what I've been arguing with them for eons. Anyway, into the 90s I was doing this, because you're taking in too much data, you're taking in stuff that isn't relevant. Why do you care what 4.5 billion people in the world are doing when they're not even relevant to anything that's you're supposed to be doing, like it's foreign intelligence for potential threats? That's what they're supposed to be doing. That's the charter of NSA. It's not to collect bulk acquisition. This I call, NSA is now I refer to as the new Stasi agency. Because the Stasi had, files on everybody. So this is what they're doing, pulling the files on everybody. And that's pointless. I mean, they're wasting their time. It does build a very big empire. I mean, if you collect a lot of data, it takes a lot to manage that, but the real user of that data is not NSA. But if you kept that and did the encryption, you could have all of these protections, find out everything you wanted to do, every objective that intelligence was supposed to do, you could achieve even if you encrypted that data and kept it that way until you showed probable cause against the individual. And then you could use courts to justify that and do a decrypt and attack them that way. That would give privacy to everybody in the world. But instead of doing that, they opted for the bulk acquisition and they got rid of the encryption so that nobody was protected. And so therefore, now they have a big acquisition and a big management problem. That's why they had to build Bluffdale, that big facility in Utah, a 1 million square foot storage facility for data. And that's where all this stuff is going, because they can't figure it out, but they're going to store it. With the understanding that somewhere down the line, someone will come up with an algorithm that will be able to go through it and give them information that's important to look at. So we'll keep it all there stored until we come up with that algorithm, and then we'll apply it. In the meantime, though, what they'll do is they'll use it to go after people for law enforcement. And here's the way this encryption process would work. If you simply set a set of criteria that said, okay, like these are the two guys that came in from Kuala Lumpur after a terrorist conference over there, and the Malaysian government informed us that they were on the way, by the way, before they left. These are the guys who called back to the Yemen facility when they were in San Diego. So we should have had them for targets from the beginning. In fact, they should have been followed as soon as they got off the airplane by the FBI, because we had all the data to do that. And that would have given us the rest of the network, and it would have worked like this. As you made phone calls around to other people, if they were in the U.S., they would be encrypted until you had multiple factors to say, okay, now we can decrypt it and target them. Okay, so that would give them even protection to that point. Until once we have probable cause, they're going to be attacked, I think, with this system. But until then, they have privacy. Now, if you're outside the country, and you're called by a terrorist on even the first time, you're immediately taken in. That's not an issue. That's not legally an issue for us in the United States. Nor is it's a relative thing. The laws for our country apply to the citizens of that country. That's true here in Europe as well as the States, as well as Russia. That's true everywhere. So when it comes to a foreigner contacting a terrorist, whether or not they're in the U.S., now we can target them without any trouble first time they make the call. And that's still legal. And you want your country to do that anyway. Because if you have a known terrorist in your country calling somebody outside the country, you want to know who that is. And you want to follow what they're saying so you can prevent it or intervene. Right? That's the whole point of it. And it doesn't matter whether it's satellite or a regular telephone. And you can see how these networks end, or email. And this is how that network would have been reconstructed if they'd used a targeted approach. All of it would have been legal, and all of it would have been, let me go back to that one. That one shows the first call to the Hollywood facility inside the United States. Well, okay, we encrypt that value. So you can't tell who it is until we have probable cause, at which time you automatically do a decrypt, and then you start targeting them, and then you find out who they are. That's the way the building process for analysis would work in this system. This is, of course, not what they decided to do, but you can see, this is to give you an idea of how that would work. That's all. And show you how you could have protection from your identity all along until probable cause was shown, and that was an effective way to do it. And it would have given privacy not only to everybody in the United States, but everybody in the world. That's not the option they picked. They picked the bulk option. And the bulk option is, look, in this case, this is the PRISM slide that showed how PRISM inputs, including the CIA and the FBI, who have access to this data through this mechanism here. This is the way they put it. These are the programs over here that show, first of all, the metadata going over here, which is the indexing, and all the content data goes down here for, this is for the digital network, and then this is the phone network over here. So you can see the two networks, and that information down here is indexed back here to the metadata and the graphing and the relationships, the social networks that are built for everybody in the world. So this is how that data is indexed, so that when you pull out a community from the metadata, you also have the indexed content of everything that's related to it that's been collected and stored. So that's how they can go in. Now the FBI can go in and say, or the CIA, or others around the world through a program called XP-Score, so can go in and pull this data out. And it means that they pull all the associated transmissions of emails and the recorded phone calls, as well as transcribed phone calls, or financial data, or any of that. That comes out with that community that you first define in the metadata and the graph. So that's how that works. That's how it's all correlated. These are the programs that are doing that. And PRISM, by the way, this is only the PRISM input. You can put the upstream in place of PRISM, or you can put the echelon, or you can put any other collection system they have in place of PRISM here. It all feeds into the same databases. So PRISM was only one of the inputs. So then they have this is a slide made by an engineer, I can tell, because he talks about, here is how you discovery. See, this is how you discover knowledge. It's low at the top and high at the bottom. Well, at the top is the different program, and it's based on metadata of known, they say strong selectors. That means it's metadata that applies to known targets. So that here, these known targets now, anything related to them is being pulled out, and they call that low discovery. Well, really, that's high discovery. But down here, then they talk about content selection from dictionary attached term. That's called dictionary select. Now that means that every analyst puts in his set of words that he wants to see, that looks through all the content that everybody's sending or talking about, and it pulls out all that content related to that. Well, I mean, that means that means any word, like, for example, in DHS, one of the words, they publish their word list they're looking for. And one of the words they're looking for is pork. So if you send an email or have a phone call with your wife and you're at work and you say, honey, let's have pork tonight for dinner. Your phone call or email gets sucked in and it gets dumped on the analyst to look at, okay? And it's just like you're making a Google search using terms, okay? It's no different than that. When you make that Google search, what do? You get hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of returns. Well, there's no possible, if you get that every day with every day's input, there is no possible way you can make it through all that data. That's why I say they're making themselves dysfunctional, because when they do that, that's the burden you put on your analysts to come up with an answer. And they're the ones that are on the line to do that, not the engineers. They're only there to get the data and dump it on you. Okay, that's really what this means. So, this is Pinwheel was the major database within NSA where all this data is found, and Marina was another one, and and then they talk XT score. Well, that's again looking through all of this bulk data using terms and things like that, instead of using the real high traffic, in the traffic thief where they have the strong selectors. That's where you get meaningful data. The rest of it is just dumping tons of material on people that's not relevant at all. So actually they have, in my view, the low to high should be high to low. So, I mean, this is also the way they justify needing a big budget, by the way. Because to get all this data, it takes a lot of money. I mean, for the 80 to 100 taps on the fiber network just in the United States, it probably costs them 10 to 100 million on every tap. And if you do that 80 to 100, that's a lot of money. And then run that around the rest of the world, that's even more money. Well, then once you acquire all this data, you've got to store it somewhere. Well, if you don't have it, you have to pay $2.2 billion to build something like Bluffdale, and then they have another 600,000 square foot facility they're building on Fort Meade in Maryland that they broke ground for last summer. So, I mean, it's a matter of having, you have to build new storage, you have to build new communications, you have to build new tapping points, you have to build, and then you have to have all these contracts to manage it, and you have to have more people come in to guard it and to keep everything protected, and then you have to hire more analysts. This is how you build an empire. This is how you go to Congress and say, I need more money. That's how you build a budget. That's exactly what their point was. It wasn't about solving the problem, it was about building an empire. And this now applies to everybody in the world, since they're going all around the world with all these agreements. All these countries are buying into this, when in fact this is a total totalitarian process. Because it's destroying our democracy. This is, in my view, the greatest threat to our democracy in my country since our Civil War.
Amen.
And now it's infecting everybody else. And everybody's buying into this, and it's a false premise buy-in. But now here's where they look at the relationship mapping within communities of social networks. For example, if this is your social network, that is at the top is your phone number that everybody else you call, and that's the timeline and your interactions over time, that gives you an idea of who you're communicating with and when. And then down on the bottom there, see data in the lower right corner. If there's data that goes with that transaction in this timeline, then you can point to it, click on it, and read it, whether it's a transcribed phone call or an email or whatever. So the data is there and available to look at to try to consolidate what your interactions are implying in your community. I mean, it's like if you're trying to smuggle drugs, you have to first find a buyer-seller connection that has to be connected, and then they have to contact the transporter, and they have to make financial transactions to transfer the money, they have to transfer the drugs, all the transactions that have to occur. To do that are represented here in the interaction of people. And you just have to start figuring out what that pattern is, and then from there on, once you discover that, you can then look at this community and tell exactly before they start doing it what they're doing and who's involved and where they're probably going to send it. That's how you can do these kinds of predictions of smugglers or even militaries and governments. So at any rate, this was the ultimate objective, to do these kinds of timelines. And they're not looking at these unless you're a target. If you're a target, this is what they're looking at. But all the data to do this is available and stored on you. That's the whole point. This bulk acquisition pulls this kind of data together or stores it for everybody. And if you become of interest at a certain time, then like you may say, I'm not doing anything, so I have nothing to fear, right? A good quote from Joseph Goebbels, as I said before. But also, it's totally irrelevant what you think. What you think doesn't matter. What the state thinks is what matters. If the state thinks you're doing something that they don't want you to do, you're a target. Doesn't matter what you think. So, at any rate, yes?
Is this a screenshot of a program?
Yes, it is, yeah. It was our equivalent program that we were doing internally in NSA. We were making a commercial product. This is the display from that commercial product.
So this is for sale for general public?
No, we were raided and stopped, okay, by the FBI.
Okay.
They didn't want this out, so.
Okay. I would like to have your slides.
Yeah, I'll have copies soon. So at any rate, that's And then what I get at was what the main user of this data, the bulk acquisition of data, is law enforcement. And they're going in, like the FBI showed on that one slide, going into those databases. They're looking for criminal activity. And if they know who you are, they have a way of getting back to everything you did. Okay, and so the rules are this. This was, this says, you can't see here, but it says law enforcement sensitive. That's the law enforcement classification system. This is the SOD, Special Operations Division of the Drug Enforcement, it's not the agency, administration it is. But the Special Operations Division is set up to look into the NSA collected data. Okay, looking specifically for criminal activity. So then these are the rules that govern it. This is policy of the Department of Justice of the United States. Okay, and it shows using this, you can't reveal it either in your reports or your affidavits to the court, or you can't even tell the attorneys or anybody in the court proceedings, and you can't even tell the state and local police forces that go arrest these people the source of the data or the data, period. And most importantly for you all here, I think, is you can't tell your foreign counterparts, which means the equivalent policing agencies here in Belgium, Netherlands, everywhere in Europe. Anybody who's cooperating with the FBI or the DEA, they can get this information. And so what they have to do is called a parallel construction. What this means is they have to use, they go back and use typical policing operations to try to find the information that would show probable cause to justify an arrest, so that they can substitute that information for the NSA information in a court of law. Okay, now these are the kinds of things like they would go through to do this parallel construction. But what it means fundamentally is they're perjuring themselves in court. So I call this a planned program perjury policy run by by the Attorney General of the Department of Justice of the United States. So, and they've been doing this since 9/11. This is not new, this is over 10 years. And this was reported by Reuters last August in my country, at least that's when I saw it. And one of their interviews with one of the federal agents that was involved in running this program commented to him, he said, "This is such a great program, I just hope we can keep it secret." Well, this entire program of collecting data has been kept secret from the American public from the very beginning. And that's been so because this has been unconstitutional all along. And they deliberately kept it, even from Congress. Originally there were only 4 people in Congress who were briefed into this collection of data.
When was the beginning?
It actually started in October of 2001. Because up to that point they didn't have the way to collect the data at fiber optic rates. We originally produced that in my little SARC SIGINT Automation Research Center. We developed the ability to process fiber optic rates, sessionize what we call, reassemble all the packets at fiber optic rates, so you can see your email. Instead of seeing a package, you get the whole thing presented to you, or the same for anything, kind of picture or anything that went across the internet. We did that in 1998. And after that, we were in competition with another program that Hayden was advocating, and so they didn't take advantage of that until after 9/11. But at that point, they had now the ability to collect all this data that they could, and they removed all the filters up front because we filtered everything out before it was never ingested and stored anywhere, because we filtered it out based on the graphing principles and the known targets and zones of suspicion around them. That was what we were looking at. That's the only thing we took out in terms of content. The rest of it, we just let go by. And we did that filtering up front. That's one of the first things they took off. They took that filtering off so they could take in all the data and store it. And the second thing they removed were the encryption processes that protected you after, even if you got it ingested, then stored into the network, into the databases. That is, they removed all protection, so you had no privacy at that point either. So everything at that point was well known. It was known on everybody because they were taking everybody and everything that was on the lines. But this is not only, this is subverting our judicial system in the United States, and it's also subverting judicial systems around the world, because this is information being held secret from the courts, and then it's being used indirectly and falsely under perjured testimony to convict people around the world. And I guess my point is that it may be, you may say, well, all these people really deserve this because they're doing something bad. But to me, democracy, it's not, the ends don't justify the means. Democracy is all about the means. It's not about the ends, it's about the means. It's giving privilege and rights to humanity. That's the means. So that's what that means to me. And I think that's the last one. So that's the real use of all this data is in policing. But it has, of course, with all this information available on everybody, it has a lot to do with targeting also. But you have the ability to target the Tea Party politically or anybody else you want.
I was wondering if you had any idea of what percentage of law enforcement in the U.S., I'm from Chicago, and I believe I'm targeted, what percentage of law enforcement in the U.S. has access to that data? Do you have any idea?
Indirectly, I think all of it. Directly, it's only the FBI and the SOD and the DEA, or the SOD within the DEA. There are regional areas where the FBI is involved in little pockets of analysis that get into this data. I'm not sure exactly where they are, but they have different coordinating centers or consolidating centers of information that they use that involves NSA, CIA, DHS, of course, the SOD, and Department of Homeland Security.
Oh,
Yeah. And also the IRS is a part of this.
Fusion centers.
Yeah, fusion centers.
Fusion
That's it. Yeah,
centers.
that's right. And the IRS is a part of it. That's how the IRS knows all the relationships of anybody who wants to get 501c3. They know that from all the graphic. That's how they can ask and they target people that way too. Yeah.
We are talking about internet, phone calls, etc. But about dark nets and the access to verify everybody.
Dark nets.
It's a parallel system from internet.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably being used by them to forward the data back. I mean, we used to call that the dark fiber network, right?
With dark net, there's no identity. We can give communications within persons, within groups, but without giving your identity free.
I really don't know where that can be true, because the system has to be able to forward it to you in some way. The data has to be there to get you information to you, and it has to get it from people wherever they are. They have to know where it goes or have a way back to them. So to ensure, let's tell them that their message got through. I mean, the whole system's set up to verify that the process works. So I don't know how that, I mean, maybe it's not a well-known procedure, but I'm sure that they have ways of getting that. Yeah.
Do NSA approve targeting people who are highly intelligent? Like, for example, in my family, we have almost 10 graduates in different fields. In law, biophysics, biochemistry, and master degree holders in all my family members. Do NSA approve targeting intellectual people?
I would say that if your family members of your family are doing something of interest to them, they'll be targeted. I mean, otherwise you're taken in with the mass of everybody else. All that data is taken in and stored. Targeting means to them somebody's going to look at that data. People are going to start looking and examining the information about you. That means targeting. Whereas everybody else is simply stored. Right? All the data that is stored. It's not, you're not targeted until people start looking at the data.
But does it mean everybody is listening?
Can we leave the questions for here and do the session again with the conference session?
Okay, all right.
Last questions?
Well, I have one important question. Do you know how all this is linked to mind control?
No, I really don't. I really don't, but it certainly builds a foundation of information to do targeting of people. And that's probably just as dangerous to set it up that way. And then they could have their reasons for targeting individuals. And how that fits, I don't know.